Hello, this is Sam Stone.
And David J. Howe, and you're listening to Mark Who 42.
Welcome to Mark Who 42 here on Subspace Radio. I'm your host, Mark Baumgarten, and we have a very special show for you. Juan Sanmiguel is sitting down with award-winning science fiction writer John Scalzi. He's written some really great books, and Juan is going to talk to him all about him and his career. But before we do that, I know it's a couple weeks late, but we didn't get a chance to congratulate Tom Baker, the Fourth Doctor, my doctor, the Tom, at the age of 91, got his MBE. That is so awesome. I guess now we call him Sir Tom Baker. I'm not really sure. But he was so happy to get it, and I am so amazed. Congratulations to Tom. Anyway, let's go now to Juan Sanmiguel as he talks to John Scalzi.
This is Juan Sanmiguel, Mark Who 42, and I'm with Hugo Award-winning author and John Scalzi, who's just finished doing a presentation in Jacksonville Public Library. How's it going, John?
It's going well. I mean, I thought that the presentation did pretty well, and people seem to be happy, and that's the most important thing. And it's my first time in Jacksonville, so after I'm done with this, I might go and see a little bit more of the town. So there you go.
No, good idea. Sadly, I don't get that much chance. Actually, there used to be a con a few blocks away from here. I don't know if they're still here around. But let's start. I'm kind of always been curious about, because I don't know if you're unusual for a person of our generation, or maybe it's typical, but what was your background? Because you said you didn't go to conventions until, because we're pretty close to age, until your 30s. I mean,
Sure.
What was your science fiction background? I mean, what did you grow up in, and why did you avoid conventions? Because if I recall correctly, you grew up in L.A., and there's San Diego if you have friends to drive in a car. Or...
Well, I don't think it's so much that I avoided conventions as it just wasn't part of my day-to-day life. I mean, I read science fiction as a kid. The very first science fiction book I read, was Farmer in the Sky by Robert Heinlein, and then, read a lot of fantasy, obviously Madeleine L'Engle, Susan Cooper, other books, Alan Dean Foster I read quite a lot of because, he was very prolific. But I wasn't really part of the science fiction community per se. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was in high school, but the kind of writing that I was kind of interested in most of all at that point was journalism. I figured that I was going to be a journalist. And indeed, my first job out of college was working at a newspaper in California. So the stuff that I was reading for the idea of what I wanted to be when I grew up was stuff like Molly Ivins or P.J. O'Rourke or Hunter S. Thompson or Mike Royko, those sorts of columnists and writers and what they were doing. And so while I was reading science fiction and fantasy for enjoyment, I wasn't looking at it with kind of an eye towards a career or as part of a community that I was looking to be part of. I knew that science fiction conventions existed, but it never occurred to me that's something that I should go to. And so, ironically, my wife, Christine, who does not write science fiction and doesn't necessarily would have considered herself part of the science fiction community beforehand, but even she went to a science fiction convention before I did. And it wasn't until I sold Old Man's War that I was like, I need to go to a science fiction convention and see what all of this is about. And so for me, it was following up on business. And now, of course, the thing is that once you get into the science fiction community, you realize it's not just about what your professional opportunities are. It's about a whole community that exists and has existed, was at that point for decades before, and continues on. And so but for me, like I said, it wasn't a question of avoiding it. It was just a question of didn't think that it was something that was anything that I would never ever basically need to be a part of. So it was like, oh yeah, they have science fiction conventions. Okay, I'm going to do theater, and I was a theater kid, and then I did journalism, and I did all those other things. So again, not avoidance, just like not an awareness that was something.
Okay, no, I was just kind of curious, and again, because I'm an Xer too, and the thing is, we had a local science fiction convention. I was running around a convention when I was 10, which may or may not have been a good thing.
Well, that's the thing, is that there are absolutely multi-generational, science fiction fans, and I think that that's actually one of the great strengths of the science fiction community, is that there is that sort of continuity. And it's also one of the other strengths is that it is welcoming, so that when I did come in finally at 33, right? 34 even. People are like, cool, glad you're here.
Oh, yeah. But aside from literature, did you have any big fandoms of media podcasts? So did you have any big media passions at the time in your early development?
Well, I think like most Gen Xers, I saw Star Wars when I was 8, and that was amazing. And I did know... some people who were very much into Star Trek. I remember my first year of college was also the year that Star Trek: The Next Generation debuted. So I remember us getting all together in the in the common room to watch the Farpoint episodes, and so that was kind of fun. And what's really funny is that, of course, now I have met several of the people, and of course, Will Wheaton and I are actual friends. So I'm like, oh, Next Generation. That's my Star Trek. But mostly what I was doing, like I said, was not science fiction in particular, but like movies in general. I was a film critic. That was my job out of college. So I watched a lot of science fiction through that, and films generally. But among the media stuff, certainly Star Trek, certainly Star Wars. I was a big Battlestar Galactica fan when I was like 9, and then played D&D in junior high and a little bit in high school. And then after that, a whole bunch of video games. So.
Cool. Actually, you brought up something that somebody wanted to ask you. They showed me their question because I teased them. I've seen John before. I can tell you if I've heard this question before. And it didn't get read, but I don't remember the story. How did you and Will Wheaton hook up as him being your primary reader?
So the story for that is that Will and I, it turns out, have a friend in common who's my friend Michael Burns. And I've known Michael since junior high. And Will and he know each other. I think Mike was friends with Anne, who was his wife. And then when Anne started dating Will, they started hanging out together as well. And I think it was about like 2008. Will and Michael were talking about something, and they were talking about books they were reading and so on and so forth. And Will was like, yeah, I'm reading this book. It's really awesome. It's called Old Man's War. It's by this guy named John Scalzi. Have you heard of him? And Michael was, yeah, I was in his wedding. And so the next time I was out in California, the three of us got together and had lunch, and I became friends with Will independently. And Will asked me if he could borrow one of my short stories to record, because he was interested in getting into audiobook narration at the time, and he wanted to have something as a calling card. So I was like, absolutely, go right ahead. And then right around the same time, Audible bought a bunch of my backlist, and they were like, is there anybody that we should consider for a narrator? And I recommended Will. Not just because he was a friend, but I knew he was interested, and he and I have very much the same sensibility. We're right around the same age. If you listen to the two of us talk, we talk extremely similarly, and we grew up in the same area together. all of that sort of stuff. So he's a really good match for how I write in the narrative tone. And then, of course, anytime that there's a question, he can just text me, go, dude, what's this? And I can answer. And so that's how we got together. I think I was the first person he narrated for. And obviously he has gone on since and narrated lots of books for lots of folks. He's done a version of The Martian. He obviously did Ready Player One, all of that sort of stuff. So, but yeah, I think I was there at the beginning of his audiobook narration. And it's been great. I mean, he's a great person for me. He and I have won awards for audiobooks together. We won a award for Fuzzy Nation, which was great. And we're still friends. So, hopefully we'll continue this collaboration for some time to come.
Great. Now, going back into, going into your career, we talked about your back. How did the blog get started?
So the blog started back in 1998. I started working freelance, and one of the things was I had worked at a newspaper. Like I said, I was a film critic, but I had also written an opinion column while I was there. And I thought maybe one day I'll get back into writing opinion columns for a living, in which case I wanted to stay sharp in the form. And there was a other newspaper columnist named James Lilacs, who was in Minnesota, and he had started writing a blog, which is called The Daily Bleat, which he continues to do. And I was like, well, that seems like a good idea. I'll write on a daily basis about just the stuff that I feel like talking about, and it will keep me exercised in that format, and we'll start. So September 13th, 1998, I started writing it, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. We'll see where it goes from there. And so I've done it continuously now for 27 years. Not always daily, but certainly with enough frequency that, it continues. And it's really funny because I went through the whole arc of what are blogs? Oh my God, blogs are amazing. And then the blogs are passé, and now they're beginning to kind of pick up just a little bit again because people are realizing that social media, ultimately you don't control it. It can go away at any time, or it might be bought by someone you think is a horrible person, or whatever it is. And there's something to be said about having a site that is always and continuously in your control.
Now, I was a big fan of your blog, and one of the things I've always wondered is the way the Pulitzers work. Are you allowed to submit your own blogs? Because I think your blog on privilege and growing up poor, is perfect Pulitzer material, and it's a pity that it didn't get picked up for that.
I would have had to have submitted it, and at the time, I think it was 2012. Was it 2012? No, it was 2005. 2005. They wouldn't have been eligible. Nowadays, they would be much more likely to be eligible because the traditional, the traditional setup for the Pulitzers, which were newspapers and to some extent magazines, has undergone such a change, and so many journalists are now basically have their own sites or have Substacks or whatever, or newsletters, that they just have to acknowledge that times have changed. So it would not have been eligible then, and that's fine. I'm not, it's weird saying this, having won 2 Hugos for for what I've written on the website, but I'm not writing it to win awards or to make money or anything like that. It's literally, if I didn't have it, I don't know that I would be happy, because it gives me an outlet to write about literally whatever I want. When I'm writing science fiction, I need to be conscious of the fact that I'm writing for a particular audience and I'm doing a particular thing. When I'm writing any other thing, it's a very specific thing. There's one place in the world where I can just write whatever I want. If I want to write about politics, I can do that. If I want to write about how, like I did just recently, I suddenly realized that my regular glasses The progressive lenses are the ones that I wear when I'm out in the world, and my computer glasses are the ones when I'm at home. So they're actually my extrovert and introvert glasses, right? Like nobody's, there's no market for that, but it is something that I'm thinking about. So I put it there. So it has been for me something that allows me to express myself on my own terms without consideration of anything else. And that's really the most important thing.
Yeah, I know. I remember one time somebody wanted to pressure you to write about something that was going on in the community, and I think you had a very meh attitude about it. I had a good laugh, and I want to be surprised about the blog. I don't want to be. I want to be, I'm always surprised by the blog and pleasantly surprised. So you know what happens.
And that's the whole point. I mean, and also the thing is that I'm not generally the right person to try to pressure to write anything, because it's like. Two things. It might be something that I'm not interested in which case, I won't have anything to say about it. Or there might be things where I'm like, I'm not ready to write about that yet. I have there have been world events that have happened recently where I've had people who are angry with me. It's like, why haven't you written about that? I'm like, well, one, because it's an extremely complicated thing and I'm not ready to write about it. And two, because I don't want it, and if you want to be angry with me and feel like I'm not taking a stand that you feel is appropriate, that's fine, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do. The flip side of that is that I've been also ahead of things that other people have, come to later and so on and so forth. But that's the whole point. It is a running commentary on my own consciousness of what I'm thinking about and why, what I want to talk about publicly and what I want to keep to myself and so on and so forth. If anybody is ever going to write about, me as a biographical subject, I've left them a 30-year trail of breadcrumbs.
And also, we'll talk, since you brought it up, film. When you were a film reviewer, I mean, what were the big challenges in doing that, or what was the most fun part doing that?
I mean, the whole fun part about it was I was 22 years old, and my job was to go watch movies, right? Like literally, it was my first job out of college, and I couldn't believe that somebody thought it was a good idea to let me do it. But that's once again a recurring theme of my career. It's like, you're going to let me do this? You're going to pay me money? Cool. But yeah, other friends of mine, I graduated in 1991. There was a recession going on at the time. A lot of my friends were like, oh, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And I'm like, yeah, what do? I go and I watch movies and I tell people what I think about them. And then on the weekends, I drive down to L.A. and I sit at the Four Seasons interviewing famous people. For me at that time, that was kind of the most amazing job I could have had. So literally all of it was the best part. Later on, when I started becoming a novelist, I realized that one of the really beneficial things that I got from that period of time was story structure, development of story. Because I was doing nothing but watching other people tell stories, 5 days a week and on the weekends, right? And so when it came time to write my own stories, I had some sort of idea of how to structure them. A lot of my dialogue comes from having watched dialogue in film and all of that sort of stuff. Enough so that my agent, when I first sent him Old Man's War, he's like, this is great. Did you originally write it as a screenplay? Because it has that 3-act structure and so on and so forth. It also means that because that's the way that I write, I saw a lot of options to film and TV because they can usually look at it and be like, oh, we know how we would do this.
Oh, yeah, no, I do this weird thing when I read books. I usually try to see where if they don't have obvious breakpoints in chapters, I try to figure out where the thirds are so I could see. And I'm scared. A lot of modern novels, at least in the science fiction field, do seem to follow the 3-act structure, which is an easy structure. It's not the only structure.
No, there's a 3-act structure. There's a 5-act structure. There's there's the I'm going to do what I'm going to do and we'll figure it out as we go along thing. And for me, the 3-act structure thing has been extremely useful, and it still happens, particularly in the Old Man's War series. Almost all of them, I've explicitly say, here's book 1, here's book 2, here's book 3, where that's how they're chopped up. I did it in Old Man's War. I did it in Shattering Peace, which is the new one which just came out. There are other ones that are very different. When the Moon Hits Your Eye is a 29-act structure because it's a series of short stories. But yeah, I'm not surprised that a lot of writers do 3-act structure because so much of science fiction and fantasy now takes a lot of their reading is media, where there is a very specific structure that they want you to that you adhere to. 3 acts in terms of science movies, 4 or 5 acts in terms of TV, and video games now are beginning to have an influence as well. So you will see that as well as previous novels and other short stories that have influenced people through the ages. So.
Since you brought it up, I mean, since we are we're a media-oriented podcast, but obviously we try to diversify.
Sure.
So, I mean, I take it is everything you do automatically under option as soon as it comes out, or is it just goes in and out of option?
So I have been very lucky that lots of stuff gets optioned, and most of it is usually right around the time that it comes out, sometimes earlier. Starter Villain was optioned almost a year before it published, simply because we shopped it around early and people were like, yes, we want that. And then there are other things that don't. Like Old Man's War has been under option one way or another for 18 years. Red Shirts has been optioned 3 or 4 times now. Lock-In has been optioned twice. The Dispatcher has been optioned 3 times, which is kind of amazing. Starter Villain only once, but it's a long option. So they all come in and out. There are some things that have never been optioned, which I find surprising. Agent to the Stars has never been optioned. Android's Dream has never been optioned, which is not too surprising. When the Moon Hits Your Eye has not been optioned yet, although I can see why, because that is kind of a weirdly structured thing, and you're like, how are we going to make that one work? So yeah, some things have been optioned constantly, some things have never been optioned. Options come in, options go out. The Interdependency was under option for 5 years. It just came back out of option, but we have people circling it, all of this sort of stuff. I'm fortunate that I'm at a level of awareness for the people who are in film and TV that they know who I am. My stuff gets reviewed reasonably well. So when they get reports from, like which books are getting starred reviews and so on and so forth, I show up there a lot. And then also just a lot of the people who are making film and TV are fans. That's how I got involved with Love, Death, and Robots, which was that Tim Miller, who is one of the executive producers of that, was just a fan of my stuff. And he's like, I want to take some of these stories. And one thing led to another. And we've had 4 seasons of the show, and I've been in every season since.
Now, you beat me to my next question about Love, Death, and Robots. That was next on my list. I have to ask you haven't had a chance. Did you get to meet Fincher?
I haven't met Fincher yet, no. But partly because, Fincher is, in addition to everything else he's doing, he's off doing all these movies and so on and so forth. Whereas Tim Miller is also doing movies because he did obviously Deadpool, he did Terminator Dark Fate, and he's developing other things as well. But also his company, which is Blur Studios, is the one who is directly involved with producing Love, Death, and Robots. So he is slightly more hands-on than David Fincher is. So he is the direct contact. Also, he is the one who is a fan of my stuff. I don't know if David Fincher has ever read a single thing that I've done, although he's seen the episodes. So he knows I exist. I just don't know that he's read any of my stuff. Whereas Tim has read quite a lot, and we are friends.
We have to take a short break. When we come back, Juan Sanmiguel has more with John Scalzi. Right after this on Mark Who 42.
Don't go away. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Mark Who 42 after this.
Get ready for the ultimate geek experience right here in the Sunshine State. Florida Geek Scene presents a full calendar of events and conventions. From anime to horror, we've got it all. Meet your favorite stars, find rare collectibles, and immerse yourself in your passion. Experience the thrill of cosplay and witness amazing live performances. Stay up to date with the latest news and reviews all across Florida. Florida Geek Scene, where pop culture happens. Visit us online for more. Don't miss out on the fun. Join us at Florida Geek Scene, floridageekscene.com.
Because the world needs another movie podcast.
The Geekcast Radio Network presents for your listening pleasure the Cinema Geek.
Hosted by Amanda, Kevin, Matt, and Dan.
Each week we dive headfirst in the landscape of movies as we discuss movie news, play movie games,
Go in depth on reviews.
And even have a top 10 countdown or two.
Also, don't miss our director retrospective series, where we review noted directors' movies film by film. Bottom line is, if you love movies and love podcasts, you need to experience the Cinema Geeks.
You can find us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, or geekcastradio.com.
You are listening to Mark Who 42's Universe.
And we're back here on Mark Who 42. I'm your host, Mark Baumgarten. Today we've got our interview with John Scalzi, and I'm going to let Juan Sanmiguel pick it up from where he left off.
Fincher's awesome. He does lots of cool stuff. I remember when I was a movie critic, I reviewed Seven, which was his second film. Also reviewed Alien 3, which, was beautiful to look at. It looked great. But even he acknowledges he had a whole lot of studio interference with that. But I remember I watched a preview of Seven where they showed it to a preview audience, and it was the first time that when the movie was done, usually when a movie's done, people talk and make noise as they go out and stuff like that. Dead silent. The entire theater was dead silent, going, "What the f*** did we just watch?"
I got to ask you a question, though, because I've never had this experience. What's the difference between seeing a movie with a regular paying audience and a reviewer audience?
So, the first time I ever went to a movie with a reviewer audience was actually when I was in college, and there was a movie that starred Nick Nolte, and I think it was called The Return of the King. Not Return of the King. Yeah. But it was something with a king, and it was being shown at a small place that was specifically for reviewers. And so you would go up to the room, and there would be a screen that would be basically just like 100-foot, or not 100-foot, but like a 100-inch screen. It's basically what would be a large screen TV today, but it was, but they were showing it in film. And everybody in there was a film critic, including in the back, in the corner, Siskel and Ebert, because it was in Chicago at the time. And so people were watching this movie, and it was really funny because some of the reviewers were basically making fun of the movie as it was being Farewell to the King, 1989. And some of them were mocking the film as it was being unspieled. And eventually it was either Siskel or Ebert was like, "Everybody shut up so we can listen to the film." And everyone was like, "Yes, teacher." You know what I mean? Because it was understood that everybody else in Chicago was reviewing the film, but the only two who mattered were Siskel and Ebert, and I thought that was kind of fascinating. But usually if they're doing a screening, what they'll do is they'll do a preview screening with a general audience, because that's what they want to do. So I would sit in with that. But if I was doing like a press junket, like when I went to go see Jurassic Park, that was specifically media folks. And we got to see it like before anybody else. They had literally just locked down the soundtrack just the day before they showed it to us. And that was interesting because you would think that my experience has generally been that reviewers respond the same way to movies that normal people do. But afterwards they think about them more.
John, one of the things that I always remember from the controversial John Campbell is to create an alien, you got to have something that acts like a man, thinks like a man, but just isn't a man. Now, obviously, in the Old Man's War, you've designed a lot of alien races, and also in your other work. How do you go about designing an alien, or is there a process, or is it just you're pantsing that too.
I mean, you think about what you're trying to do with the story and what the alien's going to be. I mean, I do think about it in the terms of an alien species that is not developed on Earth and all that sort of stuff is going to be completely alien. It's going to have a completely different biology. It's going to have different evolutionary forces, all that sort of stuff. And so you want to consider these things. At the same time, you are telling stories for humans. So if you are telling a story where these aliens are communicating with humans or are communicating with other aliens, but in a way that is going to be comprehensible to an audience, then you have to make some way to make that communication work for humans. And so what you don't want to do is basically the forehead aliens of Star Trek, right? Where, you just give them a nose appliance and be like, they're a completely alien species. And that was a practical aspect because they had, they didn't have the special effects budget at the time to make aliens truly, truly alien. But you still have to accept the fact that you are telling a story for people. And if you want to make that story move along, you have to consider how alien you are going to make your aliens. Now, I have written some very alien aliens. And I have written some aliens that are very human, right? And you try to find the happy medium for those to the extent that the story requires it. I don't think there's any one right way to do it because every story is different and your storytelling aims are going to be different as well. But if all you are doing is like making humans, but they use a lot of apostrophes in their language, then you're failing. You really need to consider what the environment that the aliens are supposed to have been part of was, and where they are going, and what their aims are, and how they would relate to the humans, and so on and so forth. So,
well, no, I always consider it a challenge because I think there's a few authors, at least one author, and I'm not going to out them. I think they tried to avoid this direct description of the aliens or not have aliens at all in their space operas, which is a choice, and it's an okay choice. But
I mean, to be fair, not overly describing the aliens is me, right? I very infrequently go into detail about what my aliens look like unless it is critical for the story.
Well, no, I always did like your description of the Oban, which says it's a cross between a spider and a giraffe, but it's not. I think that was from Zoe's Tale.
Yeah. And the thing is that I will often get people who's like, what do your aliens look like? And I'm like, got me. And so that means that when the people do fan art, sometimes it's really wild. But, the thing is that, they're going to be, the interdependency has no aliens in it, right? It's all humans. And part of that is because for the story that I was telling, I didn't want to have the complication of aliens. I wanted it all to be about the humans. Some stories in science fiction don't need aliens, and that's okay. Some of them need aliens that are close enough to humanity that the one difference is the focus of it, and that's okay. And some of them, and like Peter Watts would be a good example of this, are just so amazingly, immensely alien that you can't, that they might as well be genuinely alien.
Okay. Oh, now that since you brought up the interdependency, you brought up a topic that I wasn't familiar with, and I guess I missed it in school. I don't know where you found about the trade winds, because you're talking about an empire which is losing its ability for faster than light travel, and you said you based it on the trade winds, which it's like, whoa, wait, I heard about that, but I never knew what they were.
Well, I mean, it's in the United States, we have a very United States focused, education. For better or for worse, I'm not going to litigate that now. But what that means is we only very lightly touch upon colonialism in the Americas that doesn't directly involve us, or trade in the Americas that didn't involve us. I went to a private boarding school that is, it's called Web Schools of California. It's one of the best schools in the nation, and they do teach stuff like that. So, so that was something that was brought on. But it was also, it wasn't like I was. It wasn't like I learned about that when I was 16 and I'd be like filing it away, like one day that will be amazing. But it was just in the sense of thinking about things that are in the world. I think I might have seen a YouTube video or something that was talking about the collapse of the ocean cycle because of global warming. The global warming warms up the atmosphere. The ice in Greenland melts. That ice and the cold water from that sinks down into the ocean, which disrupts the currents, right? And so the generating current for the trade, the trade winds and the trade cycle and all that sort of stuff could go away because it's been disrupted by global warming. And so knowing that that's a consequence, you posit an idea where, for whatever reason, say in like the 12th century instead of now, for whatever reason, the world has had unexpectedly warmed up for whatever reason, and that trade cycle in the ocean had been disrupted. What would have that meant for the European colonization of the Americas and the course of history and so on and so forth? And the thing is, one of the reasons that I don't write historical fiction is because then I would actually have to research it and get it right? Whereas if I write science fiction, I can use that as a thought experiment and a basis for what eventually I did, which was the flow, which was, here is a natural feature of the universe, like the trade currents, that humans at the time don't really understand, but they use because it's there. And if it was disrupted, again, not by anything that they did or not necessarily anything they did, but by forces that they also don't understand, what would happen to them? How different would the world be if we didn't have the trade currents in the Atlantic, and so that European exploitation of the Americas didn't happen the way that it did? And the world would be very, very different.
Okay. Now, next to another one of your books, which I was always wondering, I know you mentioned it during the talk, in Starter Villain, was your major, I know you mentioned Bond villains, but I was wondering, were you specifically looking at the 70s Bond villain? Because in the 70s, it seems like most of the Bond villains were billionaires, Hugo Drax, the gentleman who ran Atlantis, who wanted to create an undersea kingdom.
Yeah.
And whereas in the 60s, I think it was either Spectre or, the Soviet Union. So I was wondering, were those, and I know later Bond villains like in...
you had Dr. No,
Well, he was supposedly working for Spectre, or at least they...
but Spectre, but that's the whole thing is like, who is doing the Spectre and what is the point of Spectre and so on and so forth. But yeah, you had these people... In all of these, not just the 60s and 70s, but also, in the era of Pierce Brosnan, where you had all these people who clearly had means that were, even if they weren't billionaires, they were unbelievably wealthy. You don't just get a volcano lair, right? You can't just pick one up for nothing. And so the capital outlay of being a supervillain has always been fascinating to me. It's like, where do you make the money for that? How does that all come? It's like, I inherited it. My great grandfather was one of the principals of the Dutch East Indies Corporation or something like that, and we've been sitting on this money for the rest of this time. No, they're doing something. Billionaires, though, quite frankly, make really good antagonists because they have the means to do any sort of ridiculous thing. Their aims are, generally not just basic ones. You want to rule the world. We know that by looking at the billionaires we already have. The ones that are in the real world right now really are of the opinion, hashtag not all billionaires, but certainly the ones that we hear about really are of the opinion that they should be running the world, and that they do have global domination plans. The Elon Musk bought X not just because he literally had no choice. He made a foolish offer and was made to stick to it, but because he also wants to make it into a universal app where you would, do your banking through X, or you would have your medical information on X, and you would just use it for everything. That is a form of global domination. Don't, by the way, ever use X for anything, not just because he's evil, but just because it's not a particularly well-designed app regardless. But that's the whole point. Billionaires make our very good template for villains because, like villains, they don't have the interest of most people at heart. Like villains, they have plans that are esoteric and not necessarily beneficial to the world at large. And like supervillains, a lot of them are sociopaths, either by personal inclination or through the isolating nature of money. At a certain point, you have enough money that anybody who is going to talk sense to you has fallen by the wayside, and you are surrounded by yes people, who will find some way to actuate any ridiculous thing that you have on your mind. That's just the nature of money. When it becomes a point that you don't have to listen to people when they tell you no, a lot of people will take that.
Okay. Going back to the old man's war, I'm kind of curious. How do you feel was it End of All Things, which was serialized, or was it
Human Division and The End of All Things were both serialized. Human Division was mostly short stories, and The End of All Things was 4 novellas.
Okay. How did you feel that experiment? Because I know that Stephen King did that in the 90s with The Green Mile, if I recall correctly. How did you feel it worked out, or did it work out?
It worked out great for a couple of reasons. I think Stephen King's problem was he was trying to do serialization in a world that was not set up for serialization at the time. In science fiction, serialization worked for a long time, particularly during the golden age of science fiction, because the main drivers of science fiction at the time were magazines. And so they could be set up to do serialized work in them, right? And so you would have novels that were originally, serialized. Dune is a perfect example. It was a serialized novel, and then it was released as as one big novel with obviously editing and so on and so forth. So that was a thing that worked. But then there was the decline of magazines and pulps and stuff like that, and the rise of science fiction as novel length, and that became such the model that, particularly in science fiction, but in fiction in general, there was no viable way to do a lot of serialization. Like Stephen King managed to do it with The Green Mile because he's Stephen King, but they tried it with a couple of other people and it didn't work because it's the commitment of people going back into the store and getting it. And of course, then the Green Mile actually became most successful when it was compiled into a novel. Fast forward into the 2010s, and there is a new distribution model for fiction and for books, which is electronic, right? And what that meant was that you weren't just locked into putting out work that Barnes & Noble and Borders and other bookstores wanted to buy. You could experiment with the length of format and see if people would be willing to buy short stories or novellas or all that sort of stuff. And two things happened at the same time. I started thinking, well, I want to go back into the Old Man's War universe, but I don't necessarily want to write a novel. I would like to write a bunch of short stories with like a character. And Tor was looking at the online world and going, I wonder if we can sell short stories and novellas. And so they came to me and they asked, actually with, what was it? Fuzzy Nation. It's like, can we break that up and serialize that and see how people respond to it? And I was like, no, it was written as a novel. If you break it up, it's not gonna work. But if you want to do something like that, we can do it with The Old Man's Worst, because I want to write a bunch of short stories with it as well. And so we worked together I wrote those short stories, and they serialized them to see if the market would do that. It was out of, actually, Macmillan's research budget, and they also told me that if it was a miserable failure, that they wouldn't hold it against me. You know what I mean? And so we checked that out, and then we also did it again with The End of All Things, where we did novellas. And from the information that came out of that, two things happened. One, the books did very well in their individual serialized format, but then they also did well as compilations. But also from that information was some of the information that Tor used in its decision-making to debut Tor.com, which became their novella line, because they were like, we have shown through this that people are perfectly willing to buy in a novella or a short story format. I think novella worked better for them, and it was more consistent. And so because of that, Tor.com started off, we started getting novellas, and the novella form has become extremely viable as a market niche. I mean, This Is How You End the Time War exploded. Murderbot started off as a series of novellas and has been hugely successful. And of course, the side effect of that has been with awards. Tor.com novellas have been the ones that have been dominating. And it's been dominating not because, Tor.com stuff is necessarily always better, but because it has the reach and the marketability and everything else, that those are the ones that people see. It has become the case where Tor.com becomes the first stop, right? Where if you are writing a novella, you're going to submit it to Tor.com, just like if you were writing a short story in the 1950s, you would submit it to John Campbell. So, and if it doesn't sell there, then everybody else gets it. But they are shaping that market the way that John Campbell shaped the short story market in the golden age of science fiction, because those are the people that everybody's writing to.
No, you got me to my next. I didn't realize I didn't make the connection between you and Tor.com, which is of course a dominant force in putting novellas in the last couple of award cycles.
Yeah, no, it wasn't something that they just sort of did willy-nilly. They actually did the research on it. They experimented. I mean, I wasn't the only one that they were, only person that they were using as an experiment for that, I'm sure, but I was the one that I knew about. And I was the one that was the, most high profile. But yeah, no, this was Tor as a publishing entity, doing what publishing entities are supposed to do, which is looking at the marketplace, seeing what's expanding, seeing what's going on, and saying, how can we tell stories in this, in this format? And they did it so completely that the novellas no longer are just confined to ebooks, right? That they are also, you can now find them in bookstores, which was not the initial market, or was not the primary market. But people really do seem to like novellas, and way back when, like I said, 2013 and 2015, what I was doing with Tor in combination was a lot of the basis of the decision to go forward from there. So for everybody who's won a novella in the last 7 years, you're welcome.
Well, we're coming up to time. You've got 2 books out this year: When the Moon Hits Your Eye and The Shattering Peace.
Yeah.
Shattering Peace is continuing of Old Man's War. Actually, we could wind up with this question. When the Moon Hits Your Eye, it seems like a continuation. I mean, obviously, there's always been humor in your books, but this seems like the biggest humor thing you've done since Red Shirts. Do you think we've broken the barrier in humor? I mean, I know you described that Douglas Adams, who many people on our podcast are familiar with, completely leveled it for science fiction comedy, and you seem to make a comeback with your win for the Hugo Award with Red Shirts.
So here's the thing, and like I want to be very clear. Douglas Adams was a genius.
Yes.
Absolutely a genius. And what he did with Hitchhiker's Guide was just brilliant. But the problem was he was a trained British pharmacist, and like literally one of only two people besides the Monty Python players who had a writing credit for Monty Python, right? And so when other people looked at his stuff, like Hitchhiker's Guide, and was like, that's how we write humor, and tried to replicate it, they failed miserably because it's not, But so one, people weren't doing humor the way that he could do humor, and what he did was so monumental in the field that other sorts of humor just kind of withered on the vine. And so for a very long time, humor was extremely difficult to sell. They would it doesn't sell, because nothing but Douglas Adams humor sold. And so any humor that needed to come in came in on the cover of Darkness. It took me 8 books, all of whom have humor in some way or another, before I could get to Red Shirts, and they would market it as humor. And one of the reasons they were comfortable doing that was I put Red Shirts on a very old contract that was only worth $25,000. So that if it failed miserably, they'd be like, nobody was out any money. Obviously it did well, won the Hugo, won other awards, and so on and so forth. And then for a short period of time, it's like it was no longer nobody but Douglas Adams can do humor. It was nobody can do humor except Douglas Adams and Scalzi, right? Which was great, but it was still a problem. Fast forward to now, and clearly this is not a problem anymore. Cat Valente did Space Opera, and which is done very well.
And actually, I should fail to acknowledge, I forgot the only other person who could do humor would be Connie Willis.
Connie Willis's was very, very dry humor. But yes, actually, say nothing of the dog. But now you have people like Matt Dinneman, who's doing Dungeon Crawler Carl. There are people who are writing explicitly funny books, in part because we've broken that belief that audiences for written science fiction aren't interested in humor as well. They are interested in humor, but they want the humor to be done well, and they want that humor to be specific to that writer. We don't need a dozen people trying to write Douglas Adams fanfic. We don't need a dozen people writing Scalzi fanfic. I mean, God forbid. No, please don't. But what it really has done is it's reminded publishers that actually science fiction audiences are like everybody. They like humor, they like pathos, they like tragedy, they like, all the sorts of things. And you can do them all in science fiction. It's not a genre that only has to be one way. So the return of humor in science fiction, I've certainly been part of that, but I'm glad that it's no longer just me out there, because by the time I showed up, Douglas Adams was dead already. So, I'm glad we have a much wider universe of humorous science fiction and fantasy books to read now than we did when I was starting out.
All right, John, I want to let you finish because I know you also have a short story available on Amazon, if you want to plug that.
Sure. So if you have Amazon Prime or Kindle Unlimited, there's a anthology of time travel stories, which is called The Time Traveler's Passport, of which my story, 3 days, 9 months, 27 years, is part. You can also buy them if you don't have Amazon Prime or Kindle Unlimited for a fairly low price. And then just this last Monday, the print and ebook version of Constituent Service, which was a humorous novella that I wrote originally for Audible Originals, is now out as well. And that one is basically what I call Parks and Recreation, but with aliens.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you for your time, and we really do appreciate it. And it'll be back to Mark at Mark Who 42.
I'd like to thank John Scalzi for coming on the show with us. You did a great job, Juan. I really appreciate you doing that for me. When we will be back next time here on Marku 42. You've been listening to Marku 42. Your hosts, Mark Baumgarten, Vicky Jakubowski, Juan Sanmiguel, and Zion Quiros. Marku 42's universe is produced and directed by Mark Baumgarten. Copyright 2025.